Hello everyone, Mike Levin, June 28th, Tuesday, at about 9 a.m. on my way to work. And let's see, this morning I thought I'd talk about one of the things that's motivating me on my big move forward recently on Anaconda, IPython, and Pandas. And initially, it's definitely Michael Kennedy's podcast called Talk Python to Me. And it has, numerous enlightening points about the whole Python world, from the tools to the community. And every once in a while, the topic of how a revolution in data science pops up in his program. And in particular, those three tools kept getting mentioned with universal approval and, how widely used they're becoming, game changers. And I'm like, okay, I'll give it a try. And then having tried it, I realized that so much about what my field is about, and the critical key central point to my field, in that it's a cat and mouse game with Google, and Google is one large cat to be locked into any sort of battle of intellect with. I think highly of myself, but not that highly when you've got a organization that hires the best and the brightest and are working on multiple simultaneous projects, some of which are, you can put it two ways. One of them is defeating people like me in that cat and mouse game, and another way of putting it is just improving search results. Not that I'm trying to make them bad, but I am certainly trying to influence them. And it used to be that, things you could really call methods and techniques of, first order complexity were capable of doing this. A few XSLT transforms on data using a well-chosen keyword field to parse your files out into file names and to link them all together with previous next arrows would satisfy all the basic checkmark things you would need to do to make incredibly optimized pages. I used to call it the lining up of the crosshairs, because once you chose your targeted keyword and it was sufficiently non-competitive, it had some search traffic that was worth getting, but not enough that you're blocked, shut out by big competitors. Once you have a keyword like that, if you use it as the file name, the title, the headline, and as the anchor text on other pages leading to that page, you pretty much could assure yourself some traffic on that. And it was a rinse and repeat process. And so thus long tail search optimization was born. And HitTail, my product, in 2006, 10 years later, it's still going strong. I should really make a video on that, how much interesting stuff plays in there. But that technique, that methodology, results in an extremely crowded, to put it kindly, web. And not all of it is necessarily, shall we say, top quality that Google wants to refer you to. So in that cat and mouse game, Google has favored fewer, better pages. And it just stands to make sense. And there's a giant contraction going on the internet and the web. The amount that is considered visible, lit up by search results, findable, and the rest of it is just sort of fading away because the cost of keeping all those pages running is not sufficient to justify the tiny bit of search traffic it might still be producing when people put double quotes around things, or put search into verbatim mode, or any one of the other few things you can do to override the new behavior, which is probably driven quite a bit by this new rank brain machine learning approach Google has. And there used to be about 4 or 5 top criteria, top relevancy factors that you could tweak to make sure your pages were doing well. And it's still probably 4 or 5, but one of them is rank brain, decisions being made by machine learning algorithms. It takes way more into account than things that are easily manipulated from a technical publishing perspective, which is really my specialty. And so in listening to these podcasts, Talk Python to me, it becomes more and more clear that being the real deal, the genuine article, being the thing that Google is trying to reward as one of those fewer, higher quality destination sites, content pieces, whatever you want to call it. The target is usually still going to be a URL of some sort, and preferably the homepage of your site, because there's still a lot of flux in site URLs and hierarchies, and the one key landing page of your entire site is always your default homepage. So Google tends to offer that a lot, and a handful of subpages deemed your sort of champion pages within your site. And when the challenge becomes pruning your site to make it achieve the perfect, to take on, to assume the perfect shape, to optimize the amount of traffic that could potentially be led to you, sort of rolling up and focusing everything that you have to put into it onto a much smaller set of pages, you can't just follow intuition. You have to follow the data for that. And to follow the data for that, people who call themselves, who still, after all this, war against SEOs, people who still call themselves SEOs, in that scenario, have to become more and more data people. And yeah, it's a keyword, it's a buzzword or whatever, but data science and data scientists just does happen to be the term that's being slapped on this lately. And it's probably a little too, highfalutin for, what I have in mind, but it's the tools of the data science people that is of great interest now to the SEO community, because right off the bat it makes coding much more accessible than it used to be. I used to always do my code by typing into Vim, popping over to a command line and executing the script. Or if it was a web-based app that I was doing, just doing some code, going to a web browser, hitting refresh. And even just that little bit of switching back and forth between two places, two windows, window switching. Way too much overhead. It's twice as many places you need to be. So cut that down to being just in one place. Enter Jupyter Notebook or IPython. And once you're in that location, you already have a few advantages, because IPython tends to be something people run on their local machines, because Anaconda makes its install very simple. That's how Anaconda comes into the picture, because everything else from Anaconda you can install pretty easily. It's Jupyter Notebook because it's one of these fancy web serving environments native in Python, a lot like Pipulate is, that takes a very controlled execution environment to get it working. And Anaconda does that very controlled execution environment on your local machine, not having to be the kind of clean slate that many servers are these days with the web, because you just instantiate a new one and you control every condition on your server. Your local machine always has a bunch of stuff going on. So Anaconda installs well, gets all your dependencies worked out, and then has its own repository system, its own system like pip or apt-get or Yum, people might know from the Red Hat world. And that kind of stuff usually doesn't work really all that well on Windows in particular. To a lesser degree on Mac, but mostly on Windows. So Anaconda works all that out by pre-compiling everything for every destination platform, operating system platform. And so you get an environment that's a lot like a server, all the benefits of a server, but on your local machine. So you execute things locally, and by executing them locally, you immediately have much more ease and comfort for interacting with data. I'm tempted to say big data, but it's not really big data. It's the kind of big data for an individual, something that might have a text file with 1 million rows you got to parse through. Well, if you're working on a server, there's always the transporting the file back and forth issue. SCP, FTP, Dropbox, what do? But you have that step, and it's a lot like switching screens back and forth between a IDE or text editor environment and a web browser to see your code run. And by just making it all in the web browser, you cut it down to one place. Similarly with your data, by working on your local machine, your data always just resides in one location. You might pull it from an API, but even if you have to store things out, you can store them as a CSV to your local drive, and then pull it immediately up in Excel without any further trouble. So you get this double efficiency, and it's hard to articulate or necessarily use as a feature to promote this environment, because it's all very intangible stuff. If you don't run against these obstacles every day, you don't know you're suffering from them. And even if you do, it's very loud in that direction. Even if you do run against them every day, you might not know you're suffering until you try something else and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know it could be so good. So as anyone who follows my videos knows, I'm pretty much, in love with Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. And that was my, I guess you'd call it workflow. Sometimes I call it my stack, but it's not really, because stacks are mostly about your code execution environments and dependencies. Mine includes my development tools and my code version control system. But I like to say stack because it's short and it's just 4 items. And if you know these 4 items, you're pretty much set for life. Bold statement, but I would go so far as to say with Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, if you get some degree of mastery over those 4 items, you're set for life. You don't really need anything else. It certainly would help you to do other things, because it has huge blind spots, like mobile development is not very strong under Python today. So you'll probably like to take up something like the Android development environment, or Xcode or something, for a little bit more fanciness and power and the more sexy platforms. But with Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, you have a safety net, a Swiss Army knife of tech in your back pocket. And I didn't want to go any further. I was like, done. I'll just keep mastering these tools. And then these podcasts got under my skin, and I guess I'll mention the second podcast. I listened through all of Michael Kennedy's Talk Python to me, realized that my big takeaway was that Jupyter Notebook, Pandas, and to a lesser degree Anaconda was part of my new workflow. These were things I had to embrace and understand and use daily, and so I started doing it. And being caught up on Talk Python to me, such as I was, I sought out the other big podcast about Python, but with an extremely greater emphasis on data science, and that is partially derivative. And it started out with 2 guys hosting it. It's now 2 guys and a woman. And I started out listening from the very latest, and they referred back to previous episodes so often, I decided I'd listen to it straight from the beginning. So I'm about 6 episodes in, and they're at just the change of 2014 to 2015, making their predictions to 2015, which is really interesting to hear, being halfway through 2016 as we are. But it's just really absolutely delightful. It fills out blind spots. Like everyone knows about Hadoop and MapReduce for handling really large jobs, breaking them down and mapping them over to a whole bunch of machines. But it turns out there's yet another thing out there called Spark, Apache Spark, which is similar to Hadoop, except it doesn't have to follow such rigid rules, because it's not going to be doing the exact same type of processing as MapReduce. So it has a greater degree of fault tolerance in distributing out the data sets for read-only use, so that they can be put to work right away. And that's Spark. And I believe it's another Java project, as many of these heavyweight systems are. A lot of things worth using end up being things that were originally programmed in Java. Things like the Lucene framework and Elasticsearch and all that stuff. But Python being what it is, wrappers are made for it so that you have a Python API to all these Java tools, making them super worth it. And it's almost like you're working on something that really is native Python. And Spark is another one of these big data things. I might start working with it, might not, but the point is that my blind spot was thoroughly filled in, and I now know what the important things out there are. And you know, I'm getting tied into, I guess, community. You would say that, you know, I felt a little bit of a loner on my project through Pipulate, and it wasn't that this stuff wasn't out there. I just didn't know to stop, and actually not even stop. You don't have to stop. You just put your headphones on and you listen while you're doing something else that's compatible with it. I didn't know to listen through them all and to absorb everything that I could absorb. And now that I have, I know I've expanded my tool set. I've expanded my workflow to include 3 new, really significant, make a big difference sort of tools that are coming into play daily here at work. I don't know what it would be like if I didn't have this new secret weapon taking shape underneath my fingers. And I'm really grateful for that. I'm going to try and give a little back. I'm going to try and share my learnings, and I'm going to try and give these folks doing, you know, podcasts and you know, trying to teach people Python and data science a little bit of feedback to show them that what they're saying really does make a difference. Make as much of my work as I can free and open source, and you know, continue to work in this sort of individual way that I do, jack of all trades, that a lot of people think is dead, but it's really great for fleshing out concepts and getting things to completion, at least in a workable daily form that is still very valuable and becoming increasingly rare. So thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon, and don't forget to subscribe.